everyone, I'm Sean Reynolds from Sportsnet, about to be joined by Ken Wiebe, also from Sportsnet. We are Kenny and Renny, and this is the season-ending avails for Kevin Cheveldayoff and Paul Maurice. We want to break down what they had to say, give you an idea of what you can expect heading into the postseason. But before we do that, we need our guy to break down the analysis. Everyone, enter Kenny. Oh, great stuff from our good buddy Tristan Rivers, who made that song for us. Needed something to bring Kenny, and now we can't get enough of it. It's all we want to do is play that song right before we came on. Usually we start the show with me and Ken in, and I said, Ken, do you want me to kick you out of the show for a second so I can bring you back into that music? And Ken was like, yeah, because we love that song. We love to hear it. Ken, how are you doing today, my friend?
Tremendous, Sean. Yeah, just taped a quick hit at the end of the rain and ready to roll, get our thoughts rolling so that I can write a column right after this about what we heard today.
Exactly. So let's get at it. What did you hear today, Ken?
Well, what we heard is a belief, not only the players believing in the direction the Jets are taking. We heard the general manager and the head coach saying that their window is about to be open once again. I think that we also heard that the defense core will be upgraded. How that happens remains to be seen. I think that all options will be explored as usual, but interesting. I mean, again, if some folks thought that there was going to be a massive announcement or a major structure from the vision, I don't think that they've been paying close enough attention. The one thing that kind of did strike me, and we've talked about this before, and it's been our whole discussion, Sean, when it comes to how do the Jets line up the window with trying to get the defense core to catch up with the elite level goaltending and the high end forwards that they have. And Paul Maurice kind of hinted that it would be challenging for some of those young players to all break in at the same time, which is what our big question has been going into next season. Will Paul Maurice trust a defense core that has Logan Stanley, Dylan Samberg, and Ville Heinola in it? He did say you'd have to have the right players with those people in order to make that happen. But to me, it sounded like there was a serious competition. I mean, I know some folks in the comments are talking about the stacked left side. I mean, the Jets have, Josh Morrissey on the left side. They have Logan Stanley and Nathan Beaulieu on the left side, but they're also going to be having Dylan Samberg and I think Ville Heinola in there. And although, yes, Paul Maurice said he wasn't thinking that Heinola would have been ready to play the right side this year. We know that Dylan Samberg has played some on the right side in the American Hockey League. I don't think for 1 second that was an accident. I think the Jets are looking at one of Heinola or Samberg on the right side next year. Now, is that more challenging for a naturally left-shot defenseman to play the right side? Yes, but I wouldn't call this a logjam. Maybe the other part too, Sean, if we're trying to read the tea leaves, maybe one of the hint was one of those defensemen would be up under consideration to be moved for a more experienced player.
That's exactly what I was about to ask you. Do you think from what you heard from Kevin Cheveldayoff today and how his talk about, and Paul Maurice and about their talk, the difficulty of bringing those guys all in at the same time means that basically we're going to pick one or two of these three guys and the others are going to be what we dangle in order to try and get the help for right now that I think we all believe they need?
Yeah, I mean, important to not read too much in, but I mean, our job is to try to speculate because a general manager will never tell you that he's shopping a young player to try to get an experienced player. Of course not. That reduces the value of the player that you're trying to move. So I think it'll be super interesting. I mean, last year we went into the offseason that if the Jets were shooting for the moon, that meant shooting for Alex Pietrangelo. And some people were, critical of Vegas. They had to trade some young players. Not young players, some very popular players, Sean. Nate Schmidt and Paul Stastny were two of the most popular Vegas Golden Knights. But in order to get Alex Pietrangelo under the cap, both those players had to be moved. So what we heard today was a, belief in the core, same belief the players have, the coach and the general manager believe. But, I mean, the core also needs to be upgraded, right? I mean, the defense core needs to be upgraded. Paul Maurice used the word thin. He complimented the players. This is not about character. We know the culture was a big word that was used today, but this team needs to get better in order to make the next step. What we saw was the President's Trophy winner get bounced in the same round as the Winnipeg Jets. You can look at that in two ways. That means the Jets made it as far as the President's Trophy winner, but it also means that that President's Trophy winner is going to be incredibly motivated to solve their own issue when it came to the playoffs. They lost to a darn good team. The Colorado Avalanche, no one would argue that the Colorado Avalanche are ahead of the Winnipeg Jets. They are. There's no disputing that. But they still got to the same place. So you can look at that two ways. The Jets obviously are going to need to improve in order to catch a motivated Colorado Avalanche team. I think it'll be very interesting. The premise I was trying to get to with Pietrangelo. Can the Jets get involved in the Dougie Hamilton sweepstakes, right? If the Jets are looking to upgrade their right-hand side, do they go out and try to get Dougie Hamilton, who is on the periphery of the Norris discussion this year? We know they would have scouted him heavily. We know that when the Jets drafted Mark Scheifele, that Dougie Hamilton went, I think, 2 players later. So can they, A, are you able to throw the kind of money that it will take? And B, do you feel that's the player that is the partner that for Josh Morrissey that we discussed? So if Hanel is coming into the lineup, if Dylan DeMello is his partner again, well, that leaves Sandberg or that maybe that means Pionk is with Morrissey. But I think it'll be interesting. Tucker Poolman can't be moved. He's a pending UFA. The Jets will not be able to get anything for him unless there's a team that feels they have to sign him. And I don't see that being the case. Tucker Poolman will have options, but he's not a piece that the Jets can trade for a top pairing defenseman. So what do you what direction do you think that they'll go based on today's discussion?
Well, I'll get into that in a little bit. I'll go directly to your question. There's a ton of different ways I could go with this, but it's interesting. I'm surprised how much they were actually open in talking about how thin their defense was, and leave it to Paul Maurice to be able to, in the same breath, show an insane amount of appreciation for the defensemen that were here, the job that they did, say that any one of those defensemen they would love to bring back, and in the same breath say what we all knew and have been waiting for this organization to say, that they're thin on defense this year, they were thin on defense last year, and it needs to be addressed. I take that and I look at that as, and you and I have had conversations about it. I talked on Winnipeg Sports Talk with Huss about it yesterday, about this team, and the capacity we feel that they have for self-reflection or maybe lack thereof. Stepping out front and stating the obvious that their defense is not where it needs to be is a refreshing breath of fresh air from both the general manager and the head coach. And when I first heard it from the head coach, again, we talked about this in the past, we don't really expect Paul Maurice to stick his nose in Kevin Cheveldayoff's business, and nor do we expect Kevin Cheveldayoff to stick his nose in Paul Maurice's business. But when Paul Maurice says that, and then Kevin Cheveldayoff comes out and essentially admits that, again, this is a conversation they've had behind closed doors and are okay having that conversation in front of the cameras, in front of the microphones. Look, here's my biggest takeaway from today. Today was an absolutely terrible day for the Paul Maurice and Kevin Cheveldayoff are not on the same page crowd. That crowd that said that there's a rift between these two, a growing rift, and there was a problem between these two. And the one shred of evidence that we saw in that regard was the times that Kevin Cheveldayoff came out and said he would like to see Ville Heinola play more He talked about it at the trade deadline. He came out today and specifically addressed those comments. He went out of his way to address those comments and say, I didn't mean that he needed to get in the lineup more often. I just meant that having to do with the taxi squad and COVID, it puts players in a bad situation. And sometimes the NHL calls us up and says, you need to pull guys up and put them on that taxi squad. And yeah, exactly. But he explained it away. He explained that there was never a feeling that they needed to do that. And I think the message that we got from both of them, which was an interesting message, Ken, was that both of them thought it would have been a very bad spot to put Ville Heinola in had they brought him in and put him onto the Winnipeg Jets roster this season. So all this talk about these two being, on opposite sides of a problem and a growing rift, maybe you're right. Maybe it happened and maybe they've kissed and made up, or maybe they know that they need to show a united front and they've been told to show a united front. You can keep thinking that if you want to. What they said today was an out and out effort to bury any kind of talk of that. And I thought it was interesting. Kevin Cheveldayoff but one of the last things he said was how proud he was of this organization and the idea that the GM is on board with the coaching staff, is on board with the players, is on board with the prospects, is on board with the scouting staff. This is an organization that prides itself on entirely being on the same page. He bragged about that today. The idea that there's a rift here it took a battering today. Ken, do you agree?
Oh, for sure. And one thing we've also talked about is if there was a difference of opinion at times is helpful for pushing the program forward, right? You don't have to agree on everything at all times, but it's not something that is going to, screw up what they potentially have. They share the same vision. They believe that this group that had 2 consecutive early exits, one in the first round, one in the qualifying round, took a step by getting to the final 8. It's not their ultimate goal. They're not planning a parade. They're not planning on having a banner put up, but they feel they took a necessary step in terms of getting back into the discussion of being a true contender, to try to get to where Colorado is. Paul Maurice's term was the Colorado Avalanche were a team the media decided. The Colorado Avalanche, Sean, were this year's 2019 Winnipeg Jets. The team that people thought was ready to take the next step. And you know what? They might have been if they had a little bit better goaltending in the series against Vegas. But Vegas is now in the conference final 3 times out of the last 4 years. And our colleague Mike McIntyre in his column talked about what's the biggest difference right now between the Winnipeg Jets and Vegas Golden Knights. The Vegas Golden Knights since 2018 now have Max Pacioretty, Alex Pietrangelo, and who's the other player that they've added since that time that is an important contributor? Mark Stone. Their biggest addition, their captain. Yeah. So if the Jets core is almost the same, except obviously they lost Dustin Byfuglien earlier than they anticipated, Vegas has gone out and made 2 massive trades and signed the biggest fish in the free agent market. So that's the difference in terms of philosophy. So right now, the other thing that stood out is that Paul Maurice believes that the prime is just entering for this core group. There were 2 years where the window was not necessarily slammed closed, but was only a hair open, if you will. Now they feel that is improving, but I think they need to improve their roster in order to achieve that plan. If you saw, I know you saw it, you were watching. Anyone who saw Nathan MacKinnon speak last year thinks that Nathan MacKinnon's not going to have the same kind of motivated summer that Mark Scheifele is going to have. You should go back and watch the video. This is a guy who's getting ready for his 9th season in the National Hockey League and said getting to the Elite 8 doesn't mean anything to him. He feels they haven't won anything. So this is a highly motivated player, one of the best players in the National Hockey League. And we know that Mark Scheifele wanted to be measured against the best in the league. Now he's going back to a division that involves Nathan MacKinnon, who is one of the best players in the league right now. Obviously, their frustration is different for different circumstances, but the Jets need to take another step. I think their core is strong, but it needs to be augmented. I think they have an elite goaltender. They have forwards that are more than capable. That the scoring dried up, no doubt about that. But I would also counter by saying if the Avalanche didn't have Nathan MacKinnon in 4 games of that series, it would have been a struggle for them. They were already out their second line center, and it was an issue for them against the Vegas Golden Knights, who were full value in winning that series. But big, fascinating times ahead. I think it's going to be very interesting to see which direction the Jets go. Do they pursue a trade? First and foremost, what happens at Seattle expansion? Let's get into that right now. Obviously, when I asked Kevin Cheveldayoff about the plan and what they may have learned from 2017, he was pretty open, at least by Kevin Cheveldayoff standards. He was pretty open in saying, I think a lot of managers had learned that, sometimes the thinking behind the side deal was sound, but losing 2 and 3 players is not worth it. You're going to lose a good player. Don't compound your problem by sending 2 or 3 out the door to save 1. And we know in a lot of circumstances that had to do with no trade, no movement clauses. But I think the Jets, I've said it all along, I think the Jets will be careful and they might still make a deal to try to protect one of Logan Stanley and Dylan DeMello. But I would say that based on Cheveldayoff's comments, that might be more unlikely than I originally thought. And that goes directly to your level of thinking this entire time.
Yeah, I think that I think it was pretty obvious when he said that. So it was funny. Someone earlier in the chat had said that Cheveldayoff was oddly revealing today, and his first answer to his first question, I thought, okay, here we go again. It's going to be one of these things where he says a lot, and in doing so says absolutely nothing, right? Talks a lot and says nothing. But I thought he was, that was correct. He was revealing today. And you asked that question, and I thought he gave a great answer on the way that he was looking about it, the things that had been learned, that general managers weren't going to get caught in some of the traps that they got caught last time after learning their lessons against Seattle. And I think that is the message that I entirely took from that they're going to lose a good player, and they know that. And that's how you keep from really causing yourself a problem and ending up losing 2 really good players. It makes sense to me because this is an organization, he talked later as well about, the importance of first round picks and trading those and how much, it stings them at the draft table when that happens, and I'm wondering if one of those times that it stung him was when he sat back and watched Nick Suzuki get taken by the Vegas Golden Knights the last time the Jets made a trade to try and keep Toby Enstrom in the fold. But I take a look at this and I think that, what in the end, what it's going to cost and what it did cost last time was 2 good players that in order to protect a player on your roster, it was going to cost you 2 good players for your future and almost more likely to be better players than the one that you were trying to protect. Right. And so I get it because the Jets are in an interesting spot because I think we both believe they need to do something. They need to compete next year. Like enough with this, the future looks bright. We've been hearing that for a long time and how happy they are with the compete level they got from their team this last season. They need to make something happen this upcoming season. And if they're going to lose a Dylan DeMello or a Logan Stanley in the process here, 2 guys who showed, Dylan DeMello's absence showed how important he was to this team in the second round, and Logan Stanley gave you a real good look of what he could be in the future. If you're going to expose a Dylan DeMello, you've got another big hole in a defense core that already has holes that you're trying to fill. That makes it tough. So to your point, and I see why you've been saying that all year, Ken, the idea of moving futures to keep the now makes sense for this team because this team is one of those teams that needs to succeed now. I still wonder, though, if you hold on to a guy like Dylan DeMello, expose a guy like Logan Stanley, and you lose a guy like Logan Stanley, that you're thinking, we still got Dylan Sandberg, who maybe is just, and maybe they think he's only a year behind where Logan Stanley was, and he can walk in this next year and be what Logan Stanley was this past season. Ville Heinola, I know we're fully expecting he's going to get in and get an opportunity, but I take away exactly what you took away from that the idea with the Winnipeg Jets is they're going to take their medicine, protect 7 guys up front, 3 guys on the back end, a goaltender, and take their lumps where it's going to happen coming out of that. I wanted to touch on his Kevin Cheveldayoff's look at the Scheifele hit. What did you think about that?
Well, certainly the timing, it's interesting. I think the message there was one thing you didn't hear Kevin Cheveldayoff say was that the suspension was excessive, but it kind of seemed like it was implied, right? I mean, isn't that the impression that you took?
Totally.
I think that he doubled down on the speed at which the play occurred. I think that was the big thing that he was trying to talk about. They had numbers to back it up. I think 0.8 seconds and 0.2 seconds after the puck had gone in. I mean, these are split-second decisions. No one is doubting that for 1 second. Kevin Cheveldayoff supporting Mark Scheifele's claim about why he may have let up. And I understand that part of it too. I mean, we all say that he should have taken the 2 strides to beat him to the post. Well, that's true, except if Mark Scheifele misses him, or if Jake Evans moves out of the way and he clips him, he goes head first into the boards at 100 miles an hour. So,
hold on, I want to address that.
Hang on.
Okay.
I can understand that viewpoint. Again, I'm not saying that is what happened. I still think that he went for the hit. And I said this yesterday. I think that the biggest problem for Mark Scheifele was he's working against the science of having traveled 190 feet. It would have been almost impossible for him to finish that hit. Having said that, it's still his it's his responsibility to not hit him in the chin. I mean, the person doing the hitting is the person who needs to make sure that he doesn't injure the opponent. I mean, that's just the way the game is right now.
I just wanted to respond to that because I've heard about that before, and I've heard some people who were really, really strongly in favor of that hit, a hit that had the potential to do a lot of damage. Say, well, what's he supposed to do? Dive, to stop the puck and go head first into the boards and risk injury? And my response to that is so he chose to blow up Jake Evans and have Jake Evans risk injury rather than risk injury himself, right? I don't like that argument, because to me it's like if he's at that speed deciding on self-preservation and not doing the same thing to preserve Jake Evans, I don't think that you can excuse that. Someone said that right here. Where was it? Okay, I love this comment. H. Wichenko says, it seemed like Chevy was mathematically roasting the Department of Player Safety. He's entirely right. And this is one thing that I thought was a little strange about this, because you're right. He never said that he thought it was excessive, but he backed up everything Paul Maurice had said, everything Mark Scheifele had said, everything any other Winnipeg Jet player had said. They brought up again the fact that, and he started out the right way. He said, we're just happy that Jake Evans is okay. But they brought up, and I don't like this argument either. They brought up the fact that, he got stretchered out, but he got on the bus afterwards. And, he was hurt, but he's skating right now. We all know these are all people who are well-versed in head injuries and what we know about head injuries now and what we don't know about head injuries. So playing the butt game with head injuries is a bad game to play, because it doesn't mean that this head injury doesn't have long-lasting ramifications for the rest of Jake Evans' life. So saying that, but he walked on the bus under his own strength, or that he's skating again, does not excuse what could still be a very, very dangerous situation. But I did like the way he broke it down. The fact that he said he picked up the puck, and once he picked up the puck, it's 0.8 seconds between Jake Evans picking up the puck and putting it into the net. And then after he puts it in the net, it's 0.2 seconds between that and the hit. It's a very detailed explanation. Everything that he talks about, he reduced his velocity by not taking those strides by 20%. This is a guy who's done his homework. And then he says,
watch the videos.
Then he says, did he hit his head? Well, I guess he could have. That to me, it was the worst thing that he could have said, because he just went in and showed that he'd watched that video inside and out, clocked it, calculated the force and the newtons and everything that you needed to figure out to decide that hit. And then he can't say that there was contact to the head, which we clearly see. He talks about where the initial point of contact is, and everyone agrees on this. It's not the head. But he says, did he hit the head? Well, and I'm paraphrasing, but tell me, Ken, if this is what you got from that. He says, well, did he hit the head? I guess he did. If you've gone out of the way to do your homework and calculated the milliseconds from which he picked up the puck and put it in the net and calculated his velocity heading down the ice, and you are kind of sloughing off the fact that he may have made head contact, which is the very point of this whole thing. I just thought it's been very consistent with what we've seen for the Winnipeg Jets in this situation, is they've talked about all of the reasons why it's not bad and seem to kind of turn their eye away from the reason it was bad.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would say too, some people think that it's only the Jets who feel the suspension was excessive, and from talking to some people around the league, that's not the case either. I mean, I think that the frustration is still being felt. I think this is a general manager who saw his top center miss the majority of both the last two series the Jets were eliminated. So I mean, I understand. I mean, a lot of what Kevin Cheveldayoff said was calculated, and I think a lot of it is still laced in frustration. And optically, no, it doesn't sound good. Just to ignore the last part that the injury happened, or maybe he wasn't hurt as severely. But I mean, it's a tough situation. I think that I've said this before, and I'm not using it as an excuse. I think that a lot of people have reached their COVID maximum. I think the COVID breaking point was hit on a lot of areas, and I think a lot of people need to unplug and decompress and get away. And will they look at it differently in the fall? I don't know. But what I think is that there is something to be learned from this entire situation, and I expect there to be, some lessons learned. I don't know if those lessons will be shared with us publicly, but I'm curious to see.
Is that a joke, Ken?
What's that?
Is that a joke?
It probably won't be shared publicly. That's right. Never mind.
Yeah.
Never mind. Let's move on. This is still a hot button topic.
He didn't go to the hospital. Wouldn't that imply Evans didn't have a concussion? That's not it at all.
No.
If you lose consciousness, you have a concussion by the very definition of it. I thought it was strange that they didn't take him to the hospital after that. I mean, clearly they've got their baseline testing and stuff like that, and that can't be infallible. We know it can't be infallible because we have an example of it with the Winnipeg Jets. The time that Alexiak and Dustin Byfuglien banged heads, and Dustin Byfuglien left the ice woozy again. As soon as he's woozy and has kind of lost the ability, that is damage to the brain. That's that part of the brain isn't working right now. Dustin Byfuglien had a concussion, left the ice, and came back and played the remainder of that game, which I think Ken, I don't remember talking to you about this, but I'm pretty sure in the press box we were all dumbfounded that he came back. But he came back because he passed all the baseline testing. That is what you need to pass to come back into the game. I say clearly it's not down to a science, because after that they end up losing Dustin Byfuglien for a number of games because he had concussion symptoms following that up.
Sure, and that's one of the issues, is that the symptoms don't always show up immediately. So, right, that's the other part of the problem. Blake Wheeler's concussion only showed up the day after, right? So this is the problem with head injuries. I mean, yes, it was terrible that Evans left off the ice on a stretcher, and his symptoms may have been quite easily, could have been worse the day after than the moment that it happened. This happened in the last minute of the game, so I don't think that we could all be playing doctor here. Anyways, it's understandably a situation that has a lot of folks up in arms and frustrated, and it's tough to find the middle ground here, I guess. It's something that we've certainly learned about the situation, and I think that best to move on. We can reignite the debate at another time.
Yeah, you know what? I just want to say a shout out to Tristan here, who Tristan Rivers, again, is the man behind Sean's Headband. The music is the man behind Ken's Enter Kenny music. He's been with us for a long time, since the beginning of this. He's also sent me some other music, which Tristan, I haven't been able to open yet, if you're still here or if you've got left to deal with kids. But Tristan Rivers is one of the many examples of our chat room that shapes this show and takes ownership of this show by the contributions that they make. Awesome guy. I'm not saying it feels like we're saying goodbye or something like that. We're going to try and make sure that we stick around and do a lot of stuff during the summer, but I just love to acknowledge Tristan every chance I can.
Awesome
get,
job.
He's done phenomenal work. Great
Sorry,
stuff.
one quick one before we shift gears here. Taylor Ewell Miller, I'm not condoning head injuries. I want fewer head injuries in the National Hockey League, not more. I'm not condoning head contact. I'm not condoning the diminishing of injuries. It's something that the league is trying to get out of the sport, and the sport will be better for it when there are not as many head injuries, because it's a game played at incredibly high speed and the collisions are incredibly violent, and sometimes that violence causes injury. That's an unfortunate byproduct of the game, and I think that the players need to be protected, which is why a stiff precedent was set. Whether or not people agree with the precedent, I think that if the precedent in the big picture is based on protecting players and trying to ensure that there are not more hits where people travel 190 feet and hit a player on a wraparound of an empty net, the game will be in a better place than it is currently today.
Yeah. Kenny, how many concussions have you had playing hockey?
I was lucky enough that I did not get any concussions playing hockey. I had one concussion as a teenager. It happened during recess at Parkside School when I was in grade 7. I was playing shortstop at the noon hour or phys ed softball game, and I went back to catch a fly ball over my shoulder, and Andrew Heinrichs was coming in. He was about 6'3", big man. He was coming in full speed. I was going back full speed. His knee hit me right in the head, and the next thing I woke up in the principal's office, and I completely blacked out. I have no memory of what happened in between taking the knee to the head and going into the office. Yeah. But I never had one from playing. And I, as many folks who know me, I liked playing a physical game, but I only got into 4 fights in my junior hockey career, so I am not as well versed in the fisticuffs department as you are, but I was fortunate enough to avoid any concussions while playing hockey. There's the potential that maybe Lance Berenz of the Winnipeg South Blues may have supplied another concussion. I don't think I ever got knocked right out, but he did give me a pretty significant beating in one of the games in one of our one of our games again. They were our biggest rival, so I should not have accepted that fight. He had long arms and I could not reach him, and it did not end well for me.
Yeah. I never got any from fighting, but I've had 8 concussions, 6 of them from hockey, or maybe 7 of them. But I mean, people are talking about how we used to handle these kind of things, getting through on adrenaline, that kind of stuff. I remember, there was one I had that I ended up having fluid on the brain, like bleeding of the brain. I remember I was working at Global News at the time, and I was pitching a story the next day, the morning after it happened. And I started talking and pitching an idea, and then I just stopped talking. And then my boss said yes, and I turned to him and I said, yeah, and he said, you were saying something, and I said, was I? And it was just like I was totally gone. So he sent me to the hospital, actually, because my reaction wasn't there. That's how I found out I had bleeding on the brain. But in that instance, in that game, I had the concussion. I stood up, my legs weren't there, and it's that weird feeling you get when you're like standing up, and then all of a sudden you're on the ground again, and you're kind of not feeling what's happening. And in that game, I remember I just went to the bench and huffed smelling salts to get me through the entire rest of the game. And if I didn't, my focus would kind of disappear and cloud over, and then I'd go and I'd play a shift, and I'd come back and I'd sniff the smelling salts. And another time we were playing back in the days when it was still the Winnipeg South Blues, and a guy I actually ended up playing senior hockey with absolutely cross-checked me right across the face at full speed. And I got up and I was so out of it, I went to hop in the opposing team's bench and got a couple sticks and slashes across the arms before I realized where I was. But I mean, we kind of, so I guess I say this to say I'm in a spot where part of my career is going live on Hockey Night in Canada and getting, a toss from Ron and talking for a little while and doing my thing and passing it on. And every once in a while when I'm on live TV, I'll be like thinking about something and I'll be talking. And then all of a sudden my train of thought just disappears. It's gone. And it's kind of like it's like a reset. It's like a zap or reset. You kind of wake up and you're like, where am I? What am I talking about? Who am I talking to? And this, I guess, is that, probably colors my perception of these situations. And I'm being upfront about this because, people are heated about these debates and these kind of things. And so my perception of this will be colored because I already know and can feel the lasting effects of the concussions that I had. And I know that the one time I went to the hospital for that, I went the next day, they did a CT scan or whatever it is, said, you've got bleeding on the brain, you need to chill out here. But I never, ever left a concussion after a game when I knew I was clearly concussed and went to the hospital afterwards. It's not something that we did. It doesn't mean that what happens to you, like brain injuries, we don't know about this kind of stuff. I didn't know back in the day when this kind of stuff was happening that I would carry those kind of issues with me be right until the very end. But you know what? It is what it is. I'm where I am now. I probably wouldn't trade, despite the fact that I know that's the situation. Maybe my decision will change down the road, but I wouldn't trade all the years of hockey that I played for that kind of thing, or the situations that I was in. So I get the old school mentality of like, keep your head up and look out. What we are balancing that with, Ken, is the idea to what you said about getting those kind of hits out of the game and those situations out of the game. Hockey is a unique sport because guys get moving so fast out there, and the Scheifele example is a perfect example of that. Scheifele's moving fast. I don't think because he's trying to come and clobber this guy. I think he's back checking, but then he ends up choosing to hit the guy. And this is the things we are talking about. And this is how we're trying to figure out what the game is and what people want it to be. Do we want it to be a place where hockey players compete for everything they have up to the point of doing something that has the potential to ruin someone's life? I think that's kind of the debate that we're at here. And so that's why I don't just kind of excuse the whole Jake Evans, well, he got up, he walked on the bus, he's skating again. It doesn't mean that it ends here for Jake Evans, what happened. That's, I guess, the longer point that I'm trying to make. Okay.
Yeah, and one quick one for Neil. Neil, I appreciate you saying with all due respect, and I have no problem whatsoever. In fact, if you had listened to our show yesterday, I applauded the back check effort by Mark Scheifele. It was incredible. One thing that people should know, Neil Pionk started almost an entire zone ahead of Mark Scheifele after the puck was chipped by him at the blue line. Mark is at the goal line, one stride off the goal line. The fact that he is able to get to the far goal line in order for the collision to happen is an exceptional back check. I'm not knocking the back check, and I'm not saying people can't go that far, but the onus is on the hitter. If you travel that far, you know what speed you're traveling at, and even if you coast from the middle of the circle, it's still incumbent on the player delivering the hit to not make that head contact. That is all that I'm saying, and I'm not backing away from that.
Exactly. And James Robinson here, who we respect like crazy because he's on here and he's commenting all the time, and we love his comments. But no one's saying this, James. No one is saying put a speed limit on how fast hockey is played. There was a time, and I remember, I think Jerome McGinley was a guy early on in this when they tried to eliminate headshots from the game. I think Jerome McGinley was one of the guys who said hockey's a fast game. You can't make those split-second decisions when it comes to hitting a guy in the head. I think what we've seen as the game has evolved over these last 10 years is that you can do that. It's just got to be better recognition of situations where you could potentially be putting a guy in trouble. I think both Ken and I are going to be the first ones to say here, neither of us think Mark Scheifele went out with the intent of blowing up Jake Evans and hurting him. None of us believe that. We're not saying put a speed limit on the game. I think that would be a ridiculous idea. No one is saying that. What people are saying is part of the discussion and part of landing on a game that is safe for everyone, so that people aren't having, the terrible stuff we've seen in the past with players like Derek Bugard and players who've lost their lives early because of this. And granted, that has a lot to do with fighting, but is just that people are trying to make the game as safe as possible so that people can take part in this game and have good quality lives afterwards. That's all we're talking about. Speaking of good quality lives and, potentially after the game, maybe still being able to play with the game that Brian Little was touched on today. Ken, your takeaway?
Yeah, I mean, I think that Kevin Cheveldayoff made it clear that there has been no medical professional who has said that Brian Little is around the corner from a return. I think that Kevin Cheveldayoff respects Brian Little a great deal, and I think what was left unsaid was that if Brian Little is unable to continue, it's up to Brian Little to make that decision. It will not be something that comes from the Winnipeg Jets. They'll give him as much time as he needs in order to decide. But we also know that, based on some of these other players that have been hurt, and Brian Little will continue to make his salary. He's not going to retire. He's not going to walk away from the money, nor should he. But in terms of the clarity, I don't think that there'll be any clarity coming until Brian Little or his agent makes any sort of announcement, like we've seen with guys, as I mentioned, like Johnny Boychuk and some other guys who have been forced to have to step away from the game because of injury. The one thing that I keep saying to people who bring up Brian Little, let's not forget how long it took Sidney Crosby to come back after that stretch of concussions, right? Like, this is not something where, sure, do Jets fans want to have some clarity? Would they like to know that $5.3 million is available? Of course, but no one can tell Brian Little, you should be you should retire right now. No, you're not in Brian Little's shoes. I mean, this is a guy who gave his life to the National Hockey League. It's up to him to decide, and if he wants to take a little bit more time to see if some of his symptoms clear, he should do so. He's earned that right. But I don't expect him to be coming back based on what we've seen so far. I mean, it's been now over... I mean, it's going to be almost 2 years by the time training camp starts.
Ken, there was an interesting question in here. I went back, I can't find it, but someone had asked about whether we think there needs to be system changes for this team. What's your take on that?
Well, my take is that the system will be adjusted with the personnel. I mean, This is what I say. This is what I say every time. For people who say, no, the Jets don't play like Vegas, they're not as aggressive in the neutral zone. Well, no, they don't have Alex Pietrangelo or Shea Theodore on the back end, so they're not going to be as aggressive in the neutral zone. You play to your personnel. This is something that is not a new development. When the Jets had Dustin Byfuglien, when the Jets had Tyler Myers, when the Jets had Jacob Trouba, all three guys who are very good at challenging at the offensive blue line and at the defensive blue line. They played an aggressive style because their personnel matched that aggressive style because of their skill set. So when the Jets are a team that has a thinner defense core that is not offensively gifted, you can't expect them to play that style and be effective. So do I think there'll be some tactical changes? Yes, I asked Paul Maurice about the question or the answer he gave me back at the draft in 2019 about he felt it was a golf analogy. The Jets in 2019 hit the ball in the water, but they're not going to change the grip. I think he revealed more than normal as well in saying that he does think that some of the tactical changes need to happen, and in order for them to continue to progress down this path that he sees them taking after building this culture, they will have to change. And I think that maybe part of being more aggressive will be related to personnel. When it comes to Ville Heinola, he's a guy that plays a fearless kind of game. Not a reckless game, but a fearless game. If you have a player like Ville Heinola, you can pressure. But the other thing about pressure, and we should know this, because even in 2018, when the Jets had a great run, they weren't exceptional defensively. They had a ton of odd man rushes because of how aggressive they were. And that was when they had 6 defensemen and a third pairing that made over $11 million. Right now,
a lot of breakaways they allowed, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there are two things to consider here. Yes, do the Jets need to play more aggressive in order to feed their game, get in transition, and score transition goals because they have forwards that can finish? Of course, but you have to have the personnel in order to do that. And right now, I don't think the Jets had that personnel the last 2 years. That's why we saw changes. So I understand some people are frustrated by coaching, but if Paul Maurice can get a Dougie Hamilton or someone of that ilk into the Jets lineup, they can be far more aggressive. They will get the puck into the forwards' hands quicker. They will have cleaner exits. They will have better entries. All of those things that are related to tactics are some things that can change with a better roster and personnel. Do I think the Jets need to make some tweaks to their defensive alignment? Of course. The Jets will never succeed unless they play a connected game. They played more of a connected game against the Edmonton Oilers. And the one other thing that we should get to, and I know that fans are upset about this, some of them, but the Jets don't need to apologize for having an elite level goalie. Of course you would adjust your tactics, but no one's saying, hey, you know what the Jets should do? Give a lot of 3-on-1s, because you know what? Connor Hellebuyck can handle it. Be more aggressive, give up more 3-on-1s, no big deal. You have to be committed in all three facets. If you don't have a connected game and if you don't play a committed defensive style, then you get swept by the Montreal Canadiens, right? You can survive against an Edmonton Oilers team that's not deep enough. They have great high-end talent. They had good goaltending. They had players who made great strides on defense like Darnell Nurse. But you have to be able to commit on all fronts, and the Jets were not as committed in the second round. There's no argument to that. Of course, losing Mark Scheifele and Dylan DeMello had a big impact on the connected nature of the game because they didn't have the depth to replace Dylan DeMello on the back end, and the forwards were not going to produce at the same level without Mark Scheifele. But having said that, you have to have, you've touched on this, Sean, the Tampa Bay Lightning, when winning the Stanley Cup, they've been a good team for a long time. They did not have Steven Stamkos for more than basically 2 periods. He had one great game, scored a goal, everything else. But they played without him for the majority of the time. because they added depth. You got to have depth pieces. Now, they've also had a bunch of, they got a bunch of top 5 picks on that team, right? So, of course, it helps when you have that, but that's part of enduring tough times. The Jets are going to need some players to elevate their level. If the Jets don't have players that elevate their level and they don't upgrade their roster, then the spinning of the wheels will occur because there's going to be 31 teams looking to improve. And even the team that wins the cup is looking to improve, right? Look at the Tampa Bay Lightning. They're still they're still in the top 4 because they still had to get their team better. In a year where they said, are they over the cap? Of course. But they also have guys that some people have never heard of that are scoring key goals in these series. Look at the New York Islanders. New York Islanders didn't go out and sign a $10 million player. They got a bunch of guys that work their behinds off. They're well coached. They have a defensive structure, and both of their goalies have been capable. So you can find a way, but it's all about having the pieces that can fit your system in order to try to succeed. Talked about this with Alain Vigneault when he was the coach of the Manitoba Moose. When he was asked, what style do you want to play? Well, in the American League, your style is completely dictated by which players you have. And the same in the NHL. If you have a team that is made up of defensive players, you play a defensive style. If you have a team that has a bunch of offensive weapons, you hope they play well enough defensively and you try to let them run and gun. But it's hard to win with run and gun in the playoffs. That's why the Jets need to try to get back to 2018 when they were an offensive team but were diligent in the defensive zone. They worked on it all year long. They will continue to have to work on it.
Just to back up to the whole idea of the systems change, I agree with you 100%. I'd asked Paul Maurice at the beginning of the year about, when this team worked best defensively. It was 2018, and I remember, because I love this explanation, I talked to another coach about the Winnipeg Jets, who at that time were just steamrolling teams in their own end and just not letting them out of the zone. And what was the breakout on many of the nights against that Winnipeg Jets team? The defenders on the opposition would simply flip it out.
High flip,
get it out, and then that team would just then the Jets would just turn around and keep coming in waves, right? They were just turning over the puck, trying to alleviate the pressure, never trying to exit the zone. They were just trying to constantly alleviate the pressure. And another coach told me the Winnipeg Jets start playing defense further up ice than any other team in the league. They don't try and stop you at their own blue line. They don't try and deny exits. They don't try and stop you at the red line. They're trying to not let you out of your own blue line. And that's how the Winnipeg Jets play like that. And a big part of that, if you remember, and you'll be able to see it in your heads, was Dustin Byfuglien sealing the wall, Trouba doing the same thing. And just the idea of getting your defense involved and pushing. And I'd asked him point blank at the beginning of the year, like, when you were at your best, is that something you're trying to get back to? And he admitted at that time, no, like a version of it, but no, we can't do that with the defense core that we have. And to me, that's just a total admission then, and I thought there was a total admission when they were talking about the thinness of the defense here, of the idea that the Jets this entire season were limited by what they had on defense. And I go back to this. I saw people talking about, geez, the Jets need to play more like Vegas. And you touched on it. Vegas can play like Vegas because they've got those horses on the back end that could play like that. I think in Winnipeg, the problem that they faced this year, especially when it came to their offensive output towards the end of the year, was that they needed to rein the horses in and have those horses have their thoroughbreds start acting as workhorses along the guys on the back end because they needed to cover off their defensive deficiencies. So you're totally right, Ken. I see their systems changing based on what they have in the lineup. But I do think overarching, there's not going to be a massive systems change. I think, to what your point, if they start getting guys like they had in 2018, they start moving back towards that. I remember Bruce Boudreau, I asked him about preparing for certain players like Mark Scheifele or Blake Wheeler, and he told me, you never, or I personally don't, Bruce Boudreau had said, I don't ever prepare for the other team's best players. I always prepare for their coach. And I said, well, that sounds weird to me. And he'd said, coaches in this league, you get, like, they'll evolve, but the evolution isn't as much as you think. I'm taking a look around the league, and I see all these guys, and no matter where they go, no matter where Pierre Laviolette goes from whatever team he goes to, you start to see the same systems pop up. Most of those guys have a philosophy and a belief in hockey, and Paul Maurice, I would argue, has this, and they try and get guys that fit their systems. They tweak their systems based on the guys they have, based on the strengths and weaknesses that they believe they have. But for the most part, I think what you've seen from Paul Maurice is going to be a scale of them playing. When they've got really good defense, they play like this. When they don't have as good defense, they play like this. When they're younger and not as experienced up front, they play like this. When they're older. So I think whatever you see, if you're expecting a totally new, different brand of hockey from the Winnipeg Jets under Paul Maurice, if that's what you're talking about, systems change, no. That is not going to happen. But to Ken's point, I agree 1,000% that it's all based on what they get. If they're able to go get some big bodies on the back end. I see people talking about Dougie Hamilton. I'm not saying it's happening, but if you want to explore the idea of a player like that coming in and the impact that player would have, that changes not the philosophy, but the way that the Winnipeg Jets execute Paul Maurice's systems, which I think, although he's evolved over the years, he's still a coach that believes that you succeed by doing certain things, and he'll keep trying to put his players in a position to do those things. Ken, I want to ask you about the idea of, with all the signings that have to be made, Neil Pionk is up, Andrew Kopp is up. Quickly, what do you think will happen with that? But the idea of D, which I think that, there's an admission they're going to try and take care of that. They said they may take care of it on the back end with, prospects coming in or trades or free agency, all those different kind of things. Tell me about what this team has to do to lock up the players it needs to, and what kind of money you see this team having to address the back end if a Dougie Hamilton were available and willing to come here.
Sure. I mean, it would be big dollars. And again, a team like Seattle will probably be looking. Dougie Hamilton loves Carolina. It's possible that he wants to stay there, but they're going to have some cap challenges, I believe. So that'll make it problematic. If it were not problematic, he would be signed already by Carolina, but he could still return there. In terms of the Jets, Logan Stanley I believe he's an RFA. That's an easy deal. That's a bridge deal, 2 for 2 or whatever you want to call it. It's $1 million or maybe slightly over. In terms of Neil Pionk, he's made $3 million on a bridge deal the last 2 seasons. I mean, he's had 2 great seasons here. There's no disputing that. His numbers were still pretty reasonable for sure. I mean, he was among the top 5 and 10 defensemen in scoring for more than the first half of the year. He dipped a little bit, but he wasn't playing on the top power play, so his minutes were reduced on the top power play, and his power play points were down a little bit. So even though he still was an important part of the second unit that kept things going. Pionk, is it a $5 million? Is it $6 million? That I don't know. Flat cap world, it's almost impossible to tell where the numbers are going. But we know the Jets value Neil Pionk. We know that Neil Pionk values the opportunity that he's had with the Winnipeg Jets. It all depends on the term. Here's the biggest thing for me, guys. What we don't know is that because of a flat cap, how long is the flat cap going to last? How long are you willing to commit for a certain number before you think that that number is going up? So if you're Neil Pionk, of course, if you're the Jets, you're going to buy some UFA years if you can. But if you're Neil Pionk, what's the incentive to going 6 or 7 years if you don't know what the salary cap is going to look like in 5 years or 4 years, right? 81.5, what if it goes to 90 somehow and the economics work out? I mean, I'm very curious to see, and that's why I loved Andrew Kopp's answer to my question about if long-term was a priority for him. He said anything is on the table. Well, guess what? Andrew Kopp is a guy who's gone through the system. He knows it inside and out. He's gone to arbitration. I think Andrew Kopp is totally fine committing as many as 4 years, but I think that Andrew Kopp, knowing the work that he's done on the CBA, he thinks the salary cap will go up. So I think if you're Andrew Kopp, you sign a 4-year deal, you get market value. I've used the Alex Iafallo example. Would his camp prefer Andre Burakovsky's deal at 4.9 instead of 4 on the nose? Of course they would, but we also know, based on what Andrew Kopp said, that he expected it to get taken care of soon and that he values his role in this team and sees it continuing to expand. So for all the people that said that Andrew Kopp is gone because he went to arbitration, forget it. That's not what's happening. Andrew Kopp is going to be staying with the Winnipeg Jets as long as he does not receive a low ball offer. If he feels that the offer is suitable and he knows he's valued here. He knows he's had opportunity here, and he knows that that opportunity will continue to be here for a team that he believes in. You don't speak that way about the core if you've got 1 foot out the door, Sean. Don't you agree? I mean, that was incredible.
Oh, God, no.
For a guy who previously did not want to hurt his bargaining position before going to arbitration and left the door open. I mean, Andrew Kopp basically put down roots in Winnipeg, basically, in his press conference. And yes, I understand people can say things publicly, but we've been around Andrew Kopp to know that he's not putting on a charade to make himself look good in PR if he plans on not sticking around. So I think he's going to be sticking around for 4 years at minimum. I think the Jets will pay him market value, and they'll continue to take another run at their window. And with Connor Hellebuyck under contract for 3 more years, the Jets' win now window is now. I think that, yes, of course you have to worry about the future and everything else, but I think that they got to push a few more chips to the middle of the table. I mean, that's the way that I view this. I know someone had asked about Ekholm. I don't see Ekholm being a possibility, because if the Nashville Predators go out of their way to keep him on their protected list and expose someone else, why would you? There's no way you would trade Ekholm after the draft. You protected him because you want to keep him. So I don't see him being available until the trade deadline. And by then, I'm not saying it's too late, but the Jets need to address this not at the trade deadline. They need to address it going into next season. And then if they still want to add somebody at the deadline, go right ahead. But this is something that can't wait until the next trade deadline. It has to be addressed this summer.
You know what I think was important in the Andrew Kopp situation, and how he was a little miffed after going to arbitration. In that arbitration, if you hear what would be said, the Winnipeg Jets would be saying, you've only done this, you've only put up these kind of numbers, you've only been able to do that, right? That's how that process works. You basically, both sides kind of crap all over each other, right, in an effort to get down to a number, and it's hard, and that's why Andrew Kopp was upset. But I think what would have happened was Andrew Kopp's response to all that would have been, I haven't been given the opportunity to do this. I only have these numbers because I don't get this opportunity. The Winnipeg Jets' response this season was the perfect response. They gave him every single one of the opportunities that he had probably been upset that he wasn't getting, in an effort to show what he could do. So what he'd said was, you're not giving me the opportunity, and it's affecting how much you're paying me. And they said, okay, we're going to get you in at this number because we need you in at this number right now. Everyone's got to remember they went into last year, had to pull the trick with Mathieu Perreault. They were up against it salary-wise. But the response was, we're going to give you, we know you were unhappy about that. You have every right to be unhappy. So we're going to give you every opportunity that you asked for. And that's what they did this year. And I think that allowed him, one, he's close with all the players here, so he feels like part of the core. But two, I think it really made him feel like the Winnipeg Jets were interested in investing in him and giving him the best opportunity he could get and turning him into the best player that he could possibly be, and then absolutely relished in it happening. Paul Maurice talked time and time again about how Andrew Kopp was able to get to where he was. So, I mean, you got to give credit where it's due across the organization for how they handled a situation that could have been a stick of dynamite. They clipped the fuse off that thing pretty early in the process here, and I think are setting themselves up really, really well in that regard.
The other big thing about that, with people who are upset about arbitration, generally when that's a lingering issue, those players are traded well before the 2-year deal expires, right? When it comes to those things, and that didn't happen here. And I mean, Andrew said flat out, what happened 2 years ago will not impact these discussions whatsoever. So I think that there's willingness on both sides to make that relationship last longer. Brent, I've said numerous times, David Gustafsson will be on the team next year, or needs to play. Of course, I mean, that's our position. I mean, I'll be shocked if David Gustafsson doesn't start the year as a fourth-line center. He has more upside than just being a fourth-line center, but that's where he's probably going to have to start his career. He's an excellent player. He brings some of that size that the Jets could add up front, and he's also got skill. He makes the player. He's not going to pile up points, but he makes the people around him better, and you can never have enough of those players in the National Hockey League. So I expect Gustafsson to play a role, not an 8-minute role. I think that if Gustafsson is the fourth-line center, there will be an ability to have that fourth line play 10-plus minutes, which is what the Jets are going to need. Everyone talking about Vegas and Colorado. Those are two teams that play 4 lines. And if you play that style of hockey and that physical brand like Vegas does, you have to have 4 lines, or you will not survive the regular season, let alone try to win 16 games in the playoffs.
Yeah. Let's end on this, Ken. I want to bring this in. What's the answer if Pomo isn't willing to play the top draft prospect this term, but it keeps bringing in, the kind of guys that he brought in, the veteran guys. I find it interesting because where we are this year is heading into the offseason and talking about the Jets and talking about them needing to add to their defense. It's a little bit of a Groundhog Day in that regard. And the same issues that the Jets were facing last year, they're facing this year. And they didn't get it done last year. They didn't address their defense in a way that they wanted to. And the fact that Paul Maurice talked about the fact that they've been thin on defense for 2 straight years is a massive acknowledgement of that. And by the way, before I get back to this, someone had said you could tell the media has been told that he's going to be back. We weren't told that, but just listen to their comments. He's going to be back. That's just the way that it goes. That's how it's going. But
if you had read my column after Game 4, you'd already know.
Yeah, but the idea of them needing to get something done, what do you think the likelihood of them getting it done this year is versus what happened this last year where they weren't able to get things done?
Sure. I mean, it's not an easy job. If it were, they would have solved the problem 2 years ago, not now, right? But they have to get it done because of what we talked about. Window to win. The Jets have Connor Hellebuyck for 3 more years. Hellebuyck made it perfectly clear that the Jets are committed on getting those players and adding those pieces to the core in order for them to get over the top. They're going to want to sign Connor Hellebuyck before that 3rd year is up, right? So, because it's an awfully difficult task to find an elite level goaltender. So, Mark Scheifele has 3 more years in his deal. Same with Blake Wheeler. The core that is committed needs to see the direction. They need to take steps forward. Otherwise, then the reset button is going to be hit at some point. So I think there will be an impetus for change. And I've said this before, because of the economic impact of COVID, I think we'll see more player movement happening this year. There are going to be teams that will enter next season on a full rebuilding mode. They are going to have players that they cannot afford to pay. And I know I talked about that a little bit going into this last summer, but it didn't transpire the way we anticipated. This year, after a full year, last year was only a couple, 10 to 12 games lost for some teams. Some teams only 8, maybe 4 home dates. This year, you've had a season where almost very little revenue is brought in. There's a huge economic impact. Some teams are going to be in full rebuild mode, and they're going to have players on their roster that they're going to have to move in order to clear out some salary. And can the Jets find the ability to add those players in a creative manner without knocking a lot out of that core? That's the challenge. It's not an easy job, but that's the job of the general manager and his staff. I expect the Jets will add a defenseman to play in the top 4. I'm not here to tell you that, yes, they're going to get Dougie Hamilton. They're going to spend $8 million plus on getting him, because that's probably what it's going to take. But I think they will make a push to get a high-end player. I've said this before. Heinola, to me, I don't know if he starts in the top 4. I think he probably starts with Dylan DeMello, unless DeMello is with Morrissey. But Heinola is a big key to unlocking the top 4. That's a good one. That's a good one to you, Will. No doubt about that. I think the Jets will have an upgraded defense core. I don't think it will include trading a core piece to get that player, but I mean, hey, we'll see how this thing develops. After the expansion draft, we'll have a lot more clarity, because the expansion draft is going to be the key to unlock the door for many teams. How does Seattle explore expansion? We know that Vegas figured that they chose a ton of defensemen, some of whom never played a game for them, right? They thought that by selecting those defensemen, they could leverage even more assets from other teams wanting to trade for that excess of defensemen. That never really transpired. So I think it'll be very interesting to see how the expansion plays out. I mean, we got to find out, first and foremost, if the Jets are going to be able to keep the defensemen that they have, let alone have how many holes they're going to have to fill. Sandberg, to me, is on the team. Hanel is on the team. But if there's some reluctance to play all 3 at the same time, then one of them needs to be moved in order to find that top 4 defenseman that the Jets need on the back end in order to eliminate that thinness that Paul Maurice touched on.
Okay, quick, no explanation. Who do you think's gone in the expansion draft?
I'm going to say Appleton, but I really have no idea. I think that Seattle's done an incredible job of keeping their plans under wraps. Vegas did an unreal job of leveraging. I think that tons of managers have learned from some of them who got fleeced. I don't think there are going to be as many side deals, but I do think that there will be side deals to be had. And after that, I believe it will be Appleton, but stranger things have happened. If they prefer, we went into last year thinking it would be Harkins, so who knows? To me, it's very interesting. And one of the comments really early, although Kevin Cheveldayoff talked about the importance of the picks, what's the value of the pick? And like, is it possible that the Jets? I'm not saying the Jets will use a first round pick to try to protect somebody, but man, it'll be really interesting to see how picks are utilized as currency for teams that have protection issues. That's one of the things that I'll be looking at, and whether it's Seattle looking to add picks the year after. I mean, we talked about Vegas, 3 times the conference final in 4 years. That's an incredibly high bar to set, and the circumstances have completely changed since when Vegas came into the league. So we're in for a fascinating offseason, Sean. I don't have all the answers. I'm going to guess. My educated guess, I hope it's educated, is Mason Appleton at this point, but the truth is that nobody really knows except for Ron Francis and his staff.
This is interesting what Darcy Collins says here. Foreshadowing by Maurice today, saying best line with Lowry. I personally think unless a trade is unless a trade is made, I think it's Logan Stanley. Personally, that's who I think is going to be that they'd be targeting.
And if that's the case, then the Jets go out and get Jamie Alexiak, the experienced version of Logan Stanley, don't you think, in free agency, or no?
I mean, I think that they would try. I think they're going to be. I think they have to swing big. We said that last year. I mean, that's my concern. Is we said this last year. I think they knew they had to. I think they're going to have a little bit. I think this year is different because I think, to what you're talking about, there's going to be a little bit more money that they're able to spend there. So I think that changes things and allows them to be a little bit more aggressive and maybe get something. But we've seen in the past, making things happen during free agency is hard for the Winnipeg Jets, especially for the Winnipeg Jets, right? So, and the Edmonton Oilers and teams like that. But yeah, we know that situation. Anyways, we're going to cut it off there. We are going to be back in some form or another. We're still kind of formulating that, but you could expect us to be around the draft or even the expansion draft. Have plans to get some stuff out there to make sure that we're still serving our audience, which is, the best. You guys are the best. I'm just going to leave it at that. But thank you for joining us. We will see you soon. And Ken, I'm just going to keep ending our shows with the music because I love the music.
Thanks for everything, everybody.
Thanks for everything, everybody. Yeah, exactly. Have a great weekend.